I'm Sanjiv Augustine. I'm the founder and CEO of LitheSpeed, and we've been doing this stuff for a while, as I'm going to talk to you about in a second. So what I want to talk to you about are a couple of things, specifically three things, to help us go from agile teams to what we call business agility. Business agility, if we define it at a very fundamental level, we're talking about being able to change or pivot, change directions on a dime for a dime, right? As an entire organization, not just as one team or not just as two teams, not just a couple of agile teams, but agile teams, multiple teams working together in consolidated fashion to adapt to changing circumstances. So it is 2022 and it's almost 2023, and agile methods have been around at this point for over 2 decades. And many of you have found ways to implement agile methods at the team level, perhaps at the project and program level, and maybe even if you've been doing it for a while at the portfolio level. But many of us still struggle to roll things out end to end so that the entire organization can change and act in unison. So that's what we want to talk about today. All right. Now, quick word about me. I've been doing this stuff for over 30 years, been in the agile space for over 20 of those years, and have been practicing agile methods, started with extreme programming to Scrum to Kanban to what have you, and more recently with the scaled methods, whether it's scaled agile framework, disciplined agile delivery, or even our own minimalist framework that we call business agility sparks. Over the last 5 years or so, our efforts have been concentrated in working at the organizational level with middle management and with executive leaders to help help them move their agile adoptions forward, their agile transformations forward, but importantly, so that they can get business outcomes achieved. Is it customer satisfaction? Is it lower cost? Is it increased engagements? Those are the things that we want as agilists and certainly as leaders and executives. That's what we've been doing for the last half a decade. And as Maggie mentioned, we have our latest publication from PMO to VMO, from Project Management Office to Value Management Office, that was released last year, is very popular with all middle management and executive leaders in particular who are looking at playing value-added roles in agile transformations. One last thing on this slide. At the bottom of the slide, you'll see a bullet that talks about my podcast, agilecaravanserai.com. I would urge you to check it out. If you go to Agile, that particular link, or to our website, in particular, especially for Tom and the other old timers over here who've been around for a while, you might be interested in checking out interviews that I've done on that podcast with signatories or authors of the Agile Manifesto, such as Jim Highsmith, who's my own mentor, as well as Alistair Coburn, Kent Beck, Bob Martin, and what have you. Please check that out. And of course, if you can check out our book on Amazon and elsewhere, you'll be pretty pleased with the results, I believe. Our team, we've been working for 15 years in this space. We have an amazing team. I'm very grateful to them every day. And as a team, we are mission driven. Our company, LitheSpeed, Flexible and Fast, is oriented towards making people's work more valued, productive, and fulfilling. If you look at the bottom left of this slide, we see that in the industry, we've been recognized for some of the work that we've done. We're very grateful for that recognition. On the bottom right of this slide, you'll also see some of the enterprise clients that we work, just a representative, not a comprehensive sample. And we might have some of our client members here today as well. So welcome to all of you. And we remain grateful for the partnership that we've had in taking agile methods forward and pushing the envelope towards business agility. Our agenda today, I want to talk a little bit about this notion of business agility. And as Karen said, where are those 3 steps? I want to get you to those 3 steps momentarily. What are the 3 steps at a very high level? We're talking about setting up end-to-end value stream teams. Agile methods tend to be implemented in silos, usually on the IT side. And what we want to do is to stretch that adoption end-to-end so that we can go from customer to implementation and back as rapidly as possible. We want to set up this middle management team of teams that we call an Agile Value Management Office, or VMO. And the reason we want to do that is because we want to align teams together and accelerate decision-making and link our strategy to execution. And then finally, we want to move our annual very slow legacy budgeting cycle, yearly budgeting cycle, towards a more adaptive, nimble, flexible funding cycle that we call fixed funding, and some of our clients called block funding as well. Let's start with business agility. As I mentioned earlier, we say we want to be able to change as an organization, change direction on a dime for a dime. All right. Sounds good. Sounds catchy. What do we mean by that? As business circumstances change, our organizations need to be able to change direction, pivot, accelerate, and implement quickly in order to achieve competitive advantage. That came from Steve Denning. What we want to be able to do is to go from idea, some sort of feature development, some sort of business idea, and deliver that quickly, measure the business outcome, and learn from the cycle. So just going through the implementation process, just coming up with an output is not enough. What we need to do is to use that output oriented towards a business outcome, look at whether we achieve the business outcome or not, and learn. If we did not, in fact, achieve that business outcome, then we want to pivot. We want to change direction. If we do implement that business outcome, then we want to be able to double down on that and accelerate that. Right. So that at a fundamental level is our learning cycle, or our cycle that defines business agility. Are we agile as a business or not? What's an example of this? On the right-hand side, you're going to see this little clip that talks about the SBA, the Small Business Administration. Great case study here. I urge you to check it out either on Google or in a book or elsewhere. It turns out that in the months of April and May of 2020, the Small Business Administration, working in partnership with the U.S. Department of Treasury and financial organizations, both large and small in the private sector, the SBA was able to process more loans in 14 days, 2 weeks, than they were able to process in the previous 14 years. So I want you to take a pause and think about that. That's pretty momentous, right? That a small government agency working with a larger fairly bureaucratic government agency working with larger organizations in the private sector, which are reasonably bureaucratic themselves, they were able to come together, take that idea of taking large amount of capital and pushing it out into the industry and making it available to small businesses in the U.S. economy, right? Of course, the driver over here is the pandemic. The driver over here was the economic collapse that was imminent. If something like this didn't happen, if you recall, the Q3 GDP growth was negative 34% or something like that. Really drop in our economic conditions. Federal government came to the rescue and pushed this stuff out. Private sector folks stepped up, and we did it in partnership. Great results and very momentous implications for our economy. The question we have to ask ourselves is, if the federal government can do this, and if they can do this not only on their own, but in partnership with private sector, what are some of the lessons that we can learn from that implementation as they went from idea to delivery to business outcome and learned? And how can we institutionalize this stuff so that it becomes routine? It becomes a matter of a course. And we're not doing it just in terms of a crisis or in terms of crisis management, but we're embedding this way of operation into our organizations themselves. That is, we are achieving an organization with resilience, with an adaptation, and with a learning cycle that helps us implement this, right? So that's what we're trying to do. If you take a look at this table, I want to call your attention to the middle column. You see our goals on the left, we see the steps on the right, we've covered that. But if you look at that middle column, it gives us an indication of what we as observers, we as participants, we as people who are implementing agile methods at scale should look forward to. What it looks like when we implement these 3 steps, we should get end-to-end MMP flow, that is minimum marketable product, small chunk of product or service, flow across organizational silos. Most of our organizations are pretty siloed. So what we really want to do is to make sure that we can get this MMP flow going, right? We want flattened hierarchy. Whether we like it or not, most organizations are implemented, or the organizational structure is implemented on a more traditional command and control type structure. And what we want to do is to put in place a more adaptive structure that is more of a network than a hierarchy, right? So that's what that one looks like. And then in terms of funding, what happens is that we have this longer term cycle where we fund things by projects or by a book of work for an entire year, and that kind of locks us in, and that funding its cycle itself becomes a major impediment or a major challenge to business agility. So what we want to do is to pre-fund our agile teams or our sets of agile teams. We call them value stream teams. We want to make sure that we have very clear performance objectives, if you will, or OKRs, as we call them, objectives and key results for those organizational implementations or for those initiatives. And we want to make sure that we can measure them as we go along. So that's what it looks like. I want to start this talk by bringing us back to basics. In the chat, I would like you to put in, just put it in the comment over there and tell me, if you will, as you work on your agile teams, how long are your sprints? Industry standard is about 2 weeks. Just pop it in the chat, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Some people talk about 4 weeks or so. If you got 5 weeks, you're not doing sprints. That's over the like. So most folks, as they're putting it up, 2 weeks, 4 weeks. All right. So we say when we work on our agile teams, we want to set up our delivery cycle in time boxes. That's what a sprint is, right? This is, of course, assuming we're implementing Scrum or some scaled agile framework that works on top of Scrum, like Discipline Agile or the SAFe framework in particular. So we say we're going to be delivering in every 2 weeks. Right? And then we say, what we want to deliver at the end of those 2 weeks is something of measurable value. More specifically, a product increment. That's what Agile Method's about. We don't want to be delivering something that is an output. We want to be delivering something that is more closer to a business outcome. And so if we're doing product development, we want to deliver an increment, a small piece of product that adds value to our end customers rapidly. Now, we may not be releasing this to our end customers at the end of 2 weeks, but we want to be able to get a small piece done as fast as possible. Right? So if you lay that cycle out over a timeline, it might look something like this that you see in the first row. We're seeing a delivery timeline. And in the second row, you're seeing a so-called discovery timeline. Now, this, of course, is the famous dual track Scrum made popular by Marty Kagan of the Silicon Valley Product Group. And it basically says that our agile teams or our Scrum teams are working on our iterative cycle in these short time boxes of 2 sprints. They have product owners, people who are set up to interact with our business customers, and other business folks interacting about a sprint or 2 in advance, making sure that they can get a piece of work that we call a sprint backlog ready for those teams to implement. Right? So we have delivery, Scrum teams chugging along. We have discovery, making sure that our product owners are checking with our customers and validating what needs to be done on an ongoing basis. And before we get started, we have that list of stuff that we call a product backlog. And that, of course, should be prioritized as well. All right, so far, so good. As we get enough stuff built up, we want to make sure that we can deliver to end customers in production. And that's what we call a minimum marketable product, or sometimes we'll call it a minimum marketed service, a piece of a service or a product. So far, so good. This is the way it's supposed to work. Look at the title. It's customer focused. It's small batch delivery. And each product increment needs to be validated, not only internally by our product owners and stakeholders, but also externally by end users and customers. And that's how Agile is supposed to work. In real life, what happens is something different. In real life, as we implement this cycle, this time box cycle in our organizations, we end up with long lead times. Things take a long time before we get to our sprint cycle and after we get through our sprint cycle, right? And what ends up happening is that since our teams are disconnected, they're working internally, but there's long lead times, and we end up being disconnected from our end users and customers, we end up delivering just output. We deliver features. Are those features validated? Maybe, maybe not, likely not. And then what happens because of that disconnection is that we don't end up moving the needle on those business outcomes. And therefore, as a consequence, we don't deliver the necessary business agility. Now, I'd like to present this slide and have you sort of keep this mental picture, because what you see over here is an organizational structure that comes to us as a decades-long result of the waterfall cycle, right? So if you remember our waterfall, we went through requirements, analysis, design, development, production, and the waterfall cycle resulted in siloed organizations. Conway's rule or Conway's law basically says whatever communication process you have, that's going to be mirrored in the organization. Certainly, whether we like it or not, we wake up in our organizations, even at the end of 2022, and we see, even though we might have agile teams, those agile teams are part of a larger ecosystem that is more manifesting waterfall methods and a command and control style of management than it is of any sort of agile adaptive style, right? So cross-silo value delivery is an issue. We're saying we want to deliver as quickly as possible. We want to learn from our business outcome, come back and test something else. Well, we run into silos. Decision-making is an issue because going up the chain, getting decisions and coming back down the chain takes time. And both of those things, whether it's the horizontal delays and impediments or whether it's the vertical delays and impediments, both of those impact and challenge our ability to deliver, right? So let's start with the first one, the horizontal one. How do we get to work across these multiple organization silos? We might have agile teams, we might have consolidated or cross-functional teams, but we still have those challenges. So I want to dial us back to something that comes to us from lean thinking, the Toyota model, the Toyota production system. In lean, there's a concept of a value stream. And what is customer value in lean? Customer value in lean means something that we can deliver to an end customer that is of value to them. Right? So if you say our end goal is to deliver to our end customers, deliver rapidly and quickly and validate what they need and invalidate what they don't need, then a value stream becomes a set of actions that take place to add that value to customers from their initial request through the realization of value by those customers. All right. And that's from the PMI's disciplined Agile I believe it's in the latest version of the PMBOK. But here on this slide, you see an example that is somewhat of a real life example. It's some of the details have been hidden because this is an actual customer, but you see, this is a credit card application process. A customer applies for a card. That data needs to be validated. The card needs to be approved. The customer gets notified, and the card is shipped to the customer. The card is received by the customer, and they probably should be an activated step there as well. But if you look at those steps, you can see below the chevrons over there, we can see an indication of teams and systems that are touched as we go from step by step. We look at this value stream, and if we can think of the value stream from the perspective of a customer journey, each one of those steps in that value stream of customer journey impacts many teams and many systems. So that's our reality. If we want to be able to go quickly across the silos, then we have to figure out a way to define how we organize our work and how we organize our teams so that we can deliver that work as we traverse multiple silos and multiple systems. So here, ladies and gentlemen, is our problem. We might be sitting in an organization where we have agile methods, and many of you said two-week sprints or 3-week sprints. Somebody said 1 to 3 week sprints. However, I would venture to say that most of us have this long lead time prior to the time when we get to the sprints, when we can start a sprint in development, and then at least some lead time before we can actually deploy any solution into production, right? So we have a fuzzy front end where we might have an approval process. Remember, I talked about delays up and down the organizational chain. We might have a business unit that might still be working in a waterfall type environment and giving us detailed requirements instead of giving us high-level features that we can, high-level epics that we can take and break down into features and break into stories. So whatever the reason, we're still facing long lead times before we get into our sprint cycle, and then long lead times after we finish up. So even if we have cross-functional agile teams, those all agile teams tend to be siloed or sequestered in an environment where they're hampered and hindered by the larger organization. And here's the statistic. We found that it takes about 9 silos to traverse before we can actually deliver value to our customers. So what we want to do is to find a way to shift left, right? All the silos on the business side, we want to be able to shift our agile work left into our customers, partner with a business, connect with the end customers, and get that MMP flowing as quickly as possible into our development cycle. And then we also want to be able to shift right downstream. As soon as we finish development, we want to be able to partner with our operations partners, our operations folks, and find a way to deploy on demand as quickly as possible using DevOps and the set of DevOps capabilities, CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous development, so that we can get that end-to-end MMP flow. Shift left to business, shift right to operations and other units so that we can get that end-to-end flow, right? And so here's an example of an organizational structure. This is from a client that we have helped set up sales, CSB, customer service and billing, and marketing. And the way we do this is we aggregate or collect agile teams into groups. And if you're using the Scaled Agile framework, you can think of it as an ART, an Agile release train, except that Agile release train is now focused towards a particular value stream. Or values, we might have a couple of arts that are focused towards a particular value stream. So we have a sales value stream, we have a CSB, customer service and billing value stream, we have a marketing value stream, and then we have these teams of teams or collections of teams, or if you use safe terminology, where we're talking about arts, agile release trains, all working together. And they are led now by a product manager. And that product manager is kind of like a mini CEO. And our value stream teams are now like mini companies within a company. So that's our goal, to set up smaller entrepreneurial units that are oriented by value streams, right? And then what we want to do is to focus those end-to-end teams or value stream teams on prioritized MMP flow. Let's unpack that term. We said an MMP is a minimum marketable product or a piece of a product, an increment of a product or service. It could be a service as well, but it is prioritized, which means we have validated what the needs of our end customers are, what the needs of our stakeholders are, and then prioritized whether we should do that or not. Right? This is a very important concept. Quite often in a legacy model, we set up doing work that actually should not be done. And so what we want to do over here is that we want to make sure that every piece of work, even if it's a smaller piece of work, is validated, it's prioritized, we work on it, and then we look for that flow from end to end. Right? And so if we use weighted shortest job or WSJF type prioritization, whatever the prioritization mechanism is that we are working directly with end customers and stakeholder representatives. We are working on small chunks, and our teams are delivering prioritized pieces of those works or chunks. So we go from potential MMPs to a queued MMP to working on it to get it delivered. Next one, queued MMP, work on it, deliver. And so what we then do happens is that we settle into a rhythm, whether it's one team or multiple teams, they're all acting in alignment, they're all linked back to business value, and they're focusing on a single MMP at a time to get things done. And so that's essentially what we want to do with our end-to-end value stream teams. Here on slide 22, I'd like to present a case study of an actual client of ours where we've set up those value stream teams. I think you can see the cursor over here. You can see the value stream teams and the owners on the right-hand side, as I showed you, the sales, customer service, billing, and marketing. But then as we start to back up now, we need a group. This is a middle management group that can pull this stuff together. That's the group that we call an Agile VMO, Agile Value Management Office. They're helping all of the value stream teams plan on a longer iterative cycle. This time we're rising above the 2-week cycle. We're looking a little further out, and maybe we're getting quarterly big room planning in place. And then above the level of the Agile VMO, the middle management level, we know that we need to align with the executive direction of the customers, our organizations as well. So at a level above the VMO, the middle management level, is the executive level. And so in this case study, you see an executive action team that has taken the strategy, laid it up by organizational units, made sure that they're specifying objectives and key results, OKRs, by business units, by value streams, lining those up, making sure that they're folding in internal needs, existing product requests, existing service requests, and then handing over to the Agile VMO so that the Agile VMO can conduct what we call lean portfolio management. All right, that's step number one. Let's look at step number two, which is to get to that middle management team of teams, if you will, an Agile VMO or Agile Value Management Office. Okay, so what we have is a reality where we have to deal with a sluggish hierarchy, command and control hierarchy, where we have to sort of go up for approval for everything, then come back down. And that causes delays and slows decision-making to such a crawl that it becomes unsustainable in today's turbulent environment. And then the answer becomes is how best can we shift up from our teams and teams of teams, value stream teams, so that we can accelerate that decision-making. And what we want to do is to make sure that we can put together a group of people that is cross-functional, business and IT, cross silos within business and within IT, across silos, and then also cross hierarchy. We want to make sure that we have executives in that group, middle management in that group, so that then we can drive lean portfolio management and adaptive governance. And I'll talk a little bit about lean portfolio management. Adaptive governance is simply making sure that we can fulfill things like compliance, audit, risk, architecture. Right? So those things are subject of a different talk. But lean portfolio management, what we want to do is to make sure that we can set up this VMO so that they can prioritize that portfolio. Remember, we said teams need validated validated MMPs. Where are they getting them from? We need to make sure that the portfolio work now is prioritized, laid out, and available for the teams, and then also lined up and organized and aligned with the executive strategy as well. So here's a case study where we have a VMO that has implemented LPM, lean portfolio management, using what we call a portfolio Kanban. Now, a Kanban is a visual management system. You guys might know that. And a portfolio Kanban is a visual management system that helps us track all the work in the portfolio. Remember, we said we have all this work that's coming through. We need to line it up and then channel it towards our teams, our value stream teams. Well, here's an example of how it gets laid out. This is a physical representation. This is a physical wall from a customer of ours. Of course, there's a digital version of this in a tool. Could be Jira, could be LeanKit, could be any one of those tools that also capture what's on the wall as a system of record. But note, if you will, the 3 rows. There are 3 rows that go end to end. And one of those rows is not labeled, but 2 of those rows implement or capture all of the work by value stream. The first value stream is something that we call customer onboarding. The second value stream in the second row is a customer billing value stream. And you can see the overall budget allocation captured there as well. But more importantly, if you look at the top, what this portfolio Kanban is implementing is a funnel of work, or a way to manage that funnel of work, where we go from funnel to selection of the MMP, to prioritization of the MMP, to what we call a program backlog, to actually implementing. All of this, if you see what you're seeing on that wall over there, all of this is managed by business customers and the Agile VMO helping those business customers manage this portfolio. So we can go from business requests to the WSJF ranking, to the estimation by our implementation teams, our delivery teams, to the business case for the MMP, approve and selected it, and then lined up for our teams. Okay? Which then brings us, if I may move on to keep us within our allocated time over here, to our third and final step. We talked about establishing value stream teams, getting our Agile teams helping them move shift left into business, shift right into production and deployment. Then we talked about a team of teams with this Agile VMO to help them manage that portfolio or govern that portfolio of work and align it with strategic objectives. Now, there is one major impediment that most organizations are dealing with in 2022, almost 2023, and that relates to the funding cycle. The funding cycle is today, continues to be the largest impediment or one of the largest impediments to business agility. You could have the best team implementing Agile at the team level. You could have the larger transformation where you scaled your Agile adoption to 10 teams, 20 teams, some of our customers with 200 teams. But we still struggle with replacing the legacy funding cycle. So you see here a quote from the Business Agility Institute, their Business Agility report in 2021. They say, scaling that change is now impeded by the traditional means of funding. And challenges of funding arise. I won't say they arise, but they just become more apparent even as our business transformation scales, right? And so our solution is to make sure that we can align our funding with an Agile way of working, Agile budgeting, Agile funding, whatever you want to call it. And our solution particularly says, once we have our value stream teams, what we want to do is to allocate or budget a certain amount of work by those value stream teams. Fixed funding by value stream. We have a value stream, we allocate a certain amount of money, and that becomes a forecast that takes us towards the end of the year. However, what that allows us to do is to keep that team together as a long-lived or a persistent team and adjust things as we go along. So on this slide, you see an annual target by value stream allocated out and budgeted out. You see quarterly reviews that say, well, are things working the way we want to? Did we achieve the business outcomes that we need to? And then if we did not achieve those business outcomes, remember, we want to go from idea to deliver the business outcome, we adjust the funding. Not possible in an annual cycle, but at least can we move towards a quarterly cycle? We look at the value stream, and then we can adjust as we go along. Now, a quick word of caution over here and a quick word of realism, if you will. Most organizations have some existing platforms. You're probably working with Salesforce or Workday or some of these major systems. We have to be able to fund those platforms as well. So sometimes Agilists forget in their excitement and passion. It's like, oh, let's just fund by value stream. Well, just remember, those value streams are dependent on enterprise platforms. And if we don't fund those platforms, then we're going to run into problems anyway. So even as we're accommodating or adjusting towards an allocation mechanism with value streams funding, I want to mention that we also always consider the platform itself and make sure that we fund our underlying platforms as well. Okay. And then here's our checklist, if you will. What we want to do is to prioritize those customer journeys yearly, pre-fund the customer journeys by value streams, decouple prioritization from funding, right? We can prioritize and reprioritize the work. That's what our product managers are doing. That's what our product owners are doing. But we're funded. We're pre-funded by Agile teams. The work is going to the Agile teams, and those Agile teams are ready to take things and get them done. Right? So we decouple the work prioritization from funding. What we're doing, though, is as things work, as we achieve our business outcomes or not, we're adjusting funding as well, but separately from work prioritization. Okay? And then if you look below the line over here, what we want to do is to determine which OKRs, objectives and key results, apply to each value stream, review those OKRs and update them quarterly to make sure we're achieving our business outcomes, align and track our MMPs to the OKR, just like we saw in that portfolio Kanban. And then the last but not least element that we need to consider is the economic performance of those MMPs. Ultimately, business agility, business outcomes are determined whether those things are delivering value or not. So we need to be able to focus on the MMPs that are economic winners. And then we need to find the courage to terminate the ones that are not. Right? In every organization, there's some pet project, there's some major thing that continues to get funded. And the bigger it is, it's harder to terminate. It's too big to fail. It's too much of a pet project for some executive up the chain. But we need to focus on MMPs that are economic winners if we want true business agility. If not, we'll be just sort of continuing in this mindless cycle of funding things that are not deserving, if you will. So let's sum it up. Our 3 steps: setting up end-to-end value stream teams, setting up our Agile VMO, moving from yearly budgeting to fixed funding. And then now we can look at our goals and say, these things will now allow us to deliver value rapidly and directly to our customers. They'll allow us to align our value stream to our customer journeys. So multiple things at the portfolio level, not just an individual customer. With the VMO, we can increase our decision-making velocity because we've flattened the hierarchy. We've brought people in. We're able to align to outcomes with our lean portfolio management. And then by pre-funding our value stream teams, we can delink our funding or decouple it from the work prioritization. And of course, we can link the strategy to execution.